Hey, it's me, Shane, Gemini Garage, and today I wanted to talk about really teeny tiny antennas and dummy loads and why I think it's highly possible that these may be your go-to antennas in the future. And you might be thinking, why wouldn't you want like an A99 or a 7-element beam or whatever? Well, certain situations call for different types of things, and you'd be surprised there may come a day when your antenna is this, or maybe your antenna is this, or maybe it's one of these right here. For a larger radio, you'd have a dummy load or something like this, and then maybe for your smaller GMRS 2-meter radios, something like that there. So here's the thing: in a situation where all communications are, like our modern way of doing things, right? Say, the cell phones are all down and everything else. People are going to look toward alternative, modes of communicating. And I really think that instead of some guy, talking on his 7-element beam on his 80-foot tower with his, 16 pill, trying to, get the message to the next town over, to get the medical supplies or to get the food or whatever. I just think that's probably not, that's probably just really not the way it's going to shake out. I think most communications in those situations are probably going to be a lot closer quarters. I think some of them, you may want to have them kind of covert, and other times there may just be so much traffic in the area that you don't want to, be running a lot of power or putting out a lot of a signal. So, anyways, with all that in mind, I'm going to kind of gather up a couple things here and show you a couple things and explain a little bit further on why I kind of think that, again, these may be your go-to antennas in the future. Good thing is they're not very expensive, and you don't have a lot of tuning to do, so there you go. Stick with me. Okay, well, I'm back, and again, just kind of going to go over a few things here as to why I think these are kind of important to have laying around, and why they'll probably be really a go-to type of antenna in certain types of disasters. So we already learned from things like, the pandemic and that kind of stuff, how just, overnight the supply of things can be depleted. If they were just to come out and tell us that the cell phone service was going to be disrupted for, just say a month or so because something happened to some satellites or something, I mean, I'll bet you every single radio that you could find that was, inexpensively priced like this, or these old CB radios you could find on eBay or garage sales, I'll bet you wouldn't be able to find one anywhere that wasn't, hundreds of dollars, because since the beginning of time, human beings have been just motivated to communicate, and in some ways it's been good, and in some ways it's been bad, but nevertheless, that's just the kind of part of who we are. And that, given the situation, if everybody had these radios, another good example is the CB radio. Now, 10 meters is 200 watts, 12 meters is 200 watts, and 11 meters I believe was 200 watts too, before they made it a citizens band. And one of the reasons they knocked it down to 4 watts is because they knew they were going to start mass producing these. They knew all the car manufacturers were going to start putting them in cars. They knew people were going to be putting base stations in their houses and buying mobile CBs. So, they knew that it would be a mess if you had a lot more. Even if you're from that time period and you ever heard the radio back then, or it was messy back then, even with it just at 4 watts. So it's kind of unfortunate that some radios did have a low power setting on them, but it's too bad more radios didn't have a low power setting on them, because I think a lot of people would have used a 1 watt setting if that's all they would have needed to talk to the person, just across the road or down the street. Now, having said that, I could see a day where you wouldn't be able to find any of these radios anywhere, and everybody's cracking them open and turning them down to a half a watt and running it through a dummy load. Or maybe putting a stubby antenna, which is almost a dummy load, on one of these. Now, why is that? Well, in the case of the CB, they knew everybody and their grandma was going to have one, right? So they wanted to, make sure that, the odds of people bleeding over and not being able to talk at all was, at a minimum. So the same thing here. If everybody, or maybe you had a piece of property and there was, 15 people on the piece of property and you all had these radios or something. Maybe you wouldn't want everybody bleeding over on everybody else's conversation. You turn these things down to 1 watt, put this stubby antenna on here. I mean, you could turn them down to a watt, but even with a watt, you know, having a larger antenna like this, it's going to help it get out, you know, a lot further and travel a lot further. So, again, one reason for wanting to kind of stunt your signal down is to, you know, if you had some type of a situation where everybody was using the same type of radio equipment, it would just be kind of a real courtesy to for everybody to turn their stuff down. The other scenario which could play out would be something where something would happen and the government would not want anybody communicating at all, and so people were doing it covertly under the radar, in which case there's no way you'd want to be using a base station antenna or anything like this. Again, you'd want to be cracking this, you know, cracking these things open and turning them down to a 1/4 watt, 1/2 watt, putting a dummy load on it just so you can talk to the guy across the street or down the road, you know, because you wouldn't want to be detected. So I could see how in a situation like that. And once again, we're talking about dummy loads or small antennas. And this isn't actually, I guess it's kind of a dummy load, but it's actually an antenna. It's made for the 2 bands that the radio is, for 144 and 440. But yeah, you know, everybody's going to want to be turning their stuff down, and you know, you wouldn't want to be getting caught, you know, and whatever. So there's another reason, you know, for covert communications. Once again, you're not going to want, and then another thing too is maybe there's nothing wrong with, you know, maybe there's no government intervention, and maybe there isn't too many people in the area, but maybe there's some really bad actors in the area. Because remember, everybody's going to have one of these or one of these. So maybe you don't want people hearing your communications. Maybe you got to go on maybe you have to go someplace or you have to do something and you don't want other people hearing it. A great way to do it is going to be, again, to kind of muffle your signal with something like this. And you know, so I guess I just kind of felt compelled to make this video because in the world of radio, it's kind of a natural instinct, all things radio, to sort of try and get your signal to go as far as you can, regardless of whether you're doing it all natural or using amplifiers or whatever. You know, the general theme has always kind of been, you know, bigger antenna, higher antenna, more power, whatever, you know, and you know, even if you're not trying to do that, you still want to get your signal to go as far as humanly possible. So I think people kind of forget that in a real situation where, you know, you've got one of the 3 scenarios that I already mentioned, you know, that's not going to be a situation where the guy that's, you know, got all the money, that has the tower and the 7-element and the 16 pill, you know, that's not going to be the guy that's going to save the day. And we've been through a lot of wars and a lot of other things in this country that I think would also prove that broadcasting your communications to everybody really isn't a good idea, and really isn't what has kept society going over the centuries. So with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up, but I did really just kind of want to do a video on that. Like I said, it is kind of counterintuitive to think about shrinking your signal down or stunting your signal down, but there's so much talk nowadays about preparedness and radios and emergency situations, whether it's a natural disaster, flood, earthquake, or, you know, whether there's some type of attack or satellite or sunspot, who knows, right? So much talk about that. I just thought maybe I'd do a video and tell everybody you really aren't going to have a big antenna or a powerful radio. It's probably going to be the opposite. Get you something small that works halfway decent, maybe an old handheld that's got a variable power on it, or get you one of these stubby antennas here. These things that came in a 5-pack for I think $13 or $14, and then these dummy loads here on this radio here and this one here are just your standard like 50, 60 watt dummy loads that you get for you know, CB/HF radio. So anyways, with that, thanks for watching, and hope it was entertaining and educational, and we'll see you next time. Gemini Garage.